Hi, I'm Kelly Lindsay. Welcome to Unit 8.5, Transformative Opportunity for the Caretender. We say this because caretending is a situation in which it is crystal clear that life at the moment is not what we want it to be. There's an obvious discrepancy between what is happening and what we want to be happening instead, and this cries out for a resolution. For that to happen, either what's happening has to change, or what we want to be happening has to, or both of them. So let's take the first one. Let's try to change what's happening. The first step in this process is to determine what exactly is happening, and how can we be sure that that's true. In some cases, there's indisputable evidence that it is by anyone's standards. And it's also pretty clear that we can either change it or we can't change it through any of our efforts or our influences. But at other times, there isn't unequivocal evidence of what really is happening. And in those cases, the next step is to acknowledge that what is happening is more accurately stated what we think is happening. Then the question becomes not whether I can change anything, but whether or not my thinking about it is trustworthy. So let's evaluate what triggers how we think about something, and that usually begins with our perception of it. We live in an experiential, evidentiary-based culture, and in general place a high value on our own senses and about to know what's true or what's not true. First-hand experience usually trumps hearsay, and book learning. We trust our own perceptions. But really, should we? There's nothing particularly infallible or even consistent in our own five senses. We exhibit remarkable variation in our abilities from person to person, and even within the same person over the course of a lifetime. Taste changes, vision generally gets worse, so does hearing. Eyewitness accounts, which have been so influential in criminal proceedings, have been a source of concern for years. An article in the online news magazine The Week reported that every year more than 75,000 eyewitnesses identify criminal suspects in the U.S., and some studies suggest that as many as a third of them are wrong. Mistaken eyewitnesses help convict 3/4 of the 273 people who have been freed from U.S. prisons on DNA evidence. The article goes on to say that more than 2,000 studies on eyewitnesses in recent decades have determined that recollections are prone to decay, distortion, and suggestion. Honest, well-meaning people often simply misremember or misreport what they have seen. On another thing, most of us think we're pretty good at reading body language. There are training academies that teach law and order professionals and interrogators how to pick the visual cues to tell whether a person is lying or telling the truth. Recent studies have shown that there's very little correlation with body language and that ability. The people in the study who were the most confident in their abilities were also the least accurate. And those were the police and interrogators who had been trained in the technique. We take in all this information to our senses, and then what do we do with it? Most of the time, we ignore it. Of the billions of bits of information that come into our brains every second, only a couple thousand get through built-in filters, such as the reticular activating system and the limbic system. What does get through gets routed to either our prefrontal cortex, where we consciously process and reflect on it, or to the lower automatic brain, where we react to it without thinking. To cut to the chase, if we're calm and open, the more information will be passed on to the prefrontal cortex, the responsive brain. If we're stressed and overwhelmed, more will be passed to the reactive brain. We also spend our lives constructing a paradigm of how the world works that seems to make sense to us. Lots of things contribute to this worldview. Our upbringing, schooling, socioeconomic, politics, religion, aptitudes and attitudes, and many others. This becomes ingrained in us. These are also filters that automatically shunt incoming information to the lower brain unless we're consciously evaluating that information to see whether it fits in with our worldview, because sometimes it doesn't fit. If we're stressed out, fearful, frustrated, or fatigued, we unconsciously either overlook the discrepancy or we make it fit anyway. And that leads to inappropriate reactions to misperceived stimuli. That is a reaction to something that does not exist. That's what we want to avoid, particularly as caretenders, but also just in life in general. So to have a better chance to find out what really is happening instead of what we think is happening, we need to strip away what we're afraid we're going to see, what we expect we're going to see, and what we're seeing just because we're too tired to see it any other way. One way to approach that is to use that same 3-word mantra we used in the last unit. Stop dead in our tracks and let the whirlwind blow by. Feel what's around without any expectation. Listen to the chatter in our heads, acknowledge that it's there, allow it to drain away, and listen to whatever replaces it. This does not have to be a 20-minute meditation. Even 5 seconds is good. Sometimes what we think is happening really is indeed what is happening, but to find that out requires conscious effort, not a knee-jerk reaction. And when we have a clearer picture of what is actually happening, we can determine whether or not we can do anything about it. That leaves the other part of this inequality equation, what we want to have happen. This is determined by those same filters we mentioned earlier, the ones that make up our personal paradigm of how the world works. The earlier discussion about the perceptions and our interpretations of them wasn't meant to engender any lack of confidence in those abilities, but just to gently erode any absolute certainty about them. The same goes for how we see the world, and any component of that should be able to withstand the same kind of scrutiny. What we want to happen may not actually turn out to be the best thing that could happen. There's the old story about the farmer who loses a horse and his neighbors bemoan his bad luck, to which he replies, maybe. The next day the horse returns, followed by a wild horse, and the neighbors extol his good fortune, to which he also replies, maybe. His son tries to break the horse the next day, is thrown, and he breaks his leg instead. Again, the neighbors say, what bad luck? The farmer says, maybe. And the next day, the army sweeps through, conscripts all the able-bodied young men into the army, leaving the farmer's son behind. What good luck? Maybe. The farmer wasn't being indecisive. He's just acknowledging that he doesn't have enough information to know whether the events turn out to be good or bad. There are just too many variables involved. The connection between cause and effect is not a straight line, but an impossibly complex web. The farmer, in effect, makes the whole notion of good and bad relativistic and essentially irrelevant. There is always another way to look at something, at anything. We just have to broaden the scope, enlarge the context in which we're seeing it. Fairness and fear are the last two F words we mentioned in the last unit. Fairness is an issue of looking back, but neither far nor wide enough to get an accurate picture. Fear is an issue of looking forward, for which there is never an accurate picture. Both are counterproductive because they are incapacitating, making us stuck and useless in the present. What we want to be is capacitated, which actually is no longer the opposite of incapacitation. Capacitation is actually the process that enables a sperm to penetrate the cell membrane and fertilize the egg. Capacitation is required to create new life, to bring about a transformation. That is what we want to do. Regardless of whether we have a religious faith, a secular faith, or no apparent faith at all, the world is huge, infinitely complex, and keeps on spinning. Personally, I'm delighted the world doesn't work the way I thought it should back when Diana was first diagnosed. If it did, she would be dead. And as grateful as I am that she is alive and well, an even bigger gift to me has been in weaning myself from that second half of the inequality equation, that part where I might think something else should happen. I just don't have the imagination or experience to match what could happen instead, including the possibility that the very thing I'm most afraid of could occur, and that would still work out fine. We'll end this unit with one of my favorite quotes, this one attributed to Joseph Campbell. We must be willing to let go of the life we planned so as to accept the life that is waiting for us. So for your personal journal this week, consider a seemingly intractable problem in your life right now. How could broadening the context with which you view this help you move forward? Thank you for listening, and enjoy the rest of your week.